Welcome everyone to our second set of notes on human change over time. Today we're going to continue looking at some of those features that distinguish groups of hominins. Just a reminder, the hominins are the group of human-like ancestors that eventually one day led to modern-day humans. So the dot point from your study design that we'll be focusing on in this set of notes is making sure that you're really familiar with the major trends in hominin evolution, particularly the differences or the characteristics that evolved between the Australopithecus genus and the Homo genus. Two of the things that your study design wants you to focus on specifically will be brain size and limb structure. So we will talk about those in this set of notes, as well as some other distinguishing features that have led to the evolution of modern day humans. So we're going to start by looking at this little bit of a map here to see how these different genus of hominins are connected. So right back here at the start of the diagram, we're sort of looking at where hominins have diverged from the larger group of hominoids. So remember, hominoids also included the chimpanzees and gorillas. So if we trace that back on the phylogenetic tree, we can see that they diverged over 7 million years ago. And then the top half of this diagram is looking at the two different genuses that we're going to be focusing on today. So the Australopithecus and the Homo sapiens. The top part of the image here, we have in yellow representing the genus Australopithecus. So that's a word that you guys are going to have to get real familiar with. So Australopithecus are a form of hominins that are thought to be direct ancestors of modern day humans. Okay, so before we started classifying organisms as the genus Homo, they were in the genus Australopithecus. In future slides you'll see how to spell it. I'm not going to bother spelling it on the screen here. Oh wait, no, I did. There you go. Okay, so Australopithecus are ancestors of modern day humans. And as we know, as evolution occurs, natural selection occurs, speciation occurs, all of those things, they lead to different traits being selected for, different changes in DNA being selected for, and eventually over time, enough changes have occurred to produce new species. And the ones in this diagram that are highlighted in green, they are individuals that belong to the group Homo. So our job today is to identify those features that change along the evolutionary path, moving from the ancestors Australopithecus to the genus Homo. Okay, so what features are we looking at that makes these two genus groups different from each other? And how have those traits evolved over time? Okay, so let's have a look at the main features between Australopithecus and Homo. So on the screen here, you're seeing some diagrams of their full bodies, and obviously lots of labels to indicate some differences between them. I'm not going to bother focusing on all of them on this diagram here because it is a bit messy, but it is a good point of reference if you want to jog your memory about some traits that we have discussed, instead of scrolling through all of those slides and listening to me talk about each trait individually. I've also included this image of Australopithecus and Homo individually without the labels, just so it makes it a little bit easier to see those physical features that are different from them. And hopefully, without having gone through any, you're picking up on some of those differences already. So let's take a look at them in a little bit more detail now. Okay, so this is a bit of a summary slide to, I guess, highlight to you the ones that you should be taking note of. Not going to read through them with you guys, but please refer back to it again to jog your memory of the ones that we are discussing. First one we're going to have a look at is the rib cage and pelvis shape between Homo and Australopithecus. So on the screen here, I've got a diagram of a human, which belongs to the genus Homo, and also Australopithecus afarensis, so our Australopithecus example. I've also included the chimpanzee here just as a point of comparison. You don't specifically need to know about the chimpanzee though. Okay, so what are we seeing between the human and Australopithecus? So we're seeing that our
rib cage here in the Australopithecus is much wider than in the genus Homo. Okay, the main reason for that is they believe that Australopithecus were herbivores, and because they were herbivores, they needed a longer digestive tract to help with breaking down that plant material they were eating. We obviously know that humans are omnivores, so our digestive tracts can be a little bit shorter because we also eat meat, which is much easier to digest compared to plant material. The other feature we're looking at is the hip bones. Okay, so this feature here. And we're seeing as we progress this way, so I guess in terms of evolution, we're getting more evolved, we can see that the hip bones or that pelvis are becoming shorter in height. So they were really long up here in the chimpanzee, but they're much shorter as we move to Homo and Australopithecus. And we're also seeing a change in the shape of the pelvis. Okay, so it's quite wide here. Actually, it's narrow in here, and these top bits stick out a little bit in the Australopithecus. Whereas in humans, we still have that really wide, bowl-shaped pelvis in the middle here, and these hip bones don't stick out as much. Okay, and the reason for that, there's actually two reasons for it. This structure that we have in the genus Homo, so being shorter hip bones but a more bowl-shaped pelvis, allows for better upright walking. And it also means that that bowl-shaped pelvis is able to carry a child with a bigger brain capacity, and obviously make it a little bit easier to birth that child with a bigger brain capacity. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. The next feature we're going to look at is the arrangement of the tibia and the femur, so the leg bones within an Australopithecus and a Homo. Remember, one of those distinguishing features of the group hominins was that they have the ability to walk upright, or they're bipedal. So we're going to have a look at some of those features that allow them to do that. The main one being the arrangement of the leg bones. So in the diagram here, what you're looking at is the femur of a human, so human being the first diagram here. So the leg bone of the human is arranged in such a way that it's on an angle where our knees are lining up quite nicely with the middle of our pelvis. Okay, and the reason to do that is if your knee bones are lining up quite closely with the middle of your pelvis, it means that when you are only standing on one leg, you are able to keep that center of gravity and balance quite well. If you were to compare that to Australopithecus or even a chimpanzee, chimpanzee is probably easier for you guys to see this in terms of, you've all seen chimps try and walk around and it looks like they're kind of waddling. That's because they don't have their knee bones angled into towards the center of their pelvis. So they don't actually have a center of gravity underneath the middle of their pelvis. Their center of gravity is moving from side to side every time they try and take a step on two legs. So not very effective. As hominins have evolved, so Lucy is an example of an Australopithecus. As hominins have evolved, this angle has gotten closer and closer to that center of the pelvis. So the angle on the leg bones of the Australopithecus are not as steep as the angle in the genus Homo. Okay, it just means they aren't as great or as well balanced as the genus Homo, but they still do have the ability to walk upright. The other features in the leg that does allow for this upright walking is the structure of the feet. Okay, so if you look at the bottom of the screen here, we've got a picture of human feet, Australopithecus feet, and also chimpanzee feet. Now, obviously, chimpanzees still have the opposable thumb on their toes, whereas Australopithecus and Homo do not. So that's probably one main difference between us and chimpanzees. But as we progress through hominins, so moving from Australopithecus to Homo, we actually see that that genus of Homo develops the arch in their foot, okay? Whereas Australopithecus have very flat feet. Again, they still can walk upright, it's just not as smooth or as agile, and they can't do it for as long distances as what we could. The last feature on the screen here Let's hope the image pops up when I push this button. Yep, here we go. So the last feature on the screen here, if I just erase all that, is looking at the arm to leg ratio in the Australopithecus and Homo. So you will notice that in Australopithecus, their arms and their leg size are roughly the same, okay, roughly the same length. And that is very different to what we see in the genus Homo, and particularly what we see in modern day humans. So you probably haven't tried this, but if you were to measure from your shoulder to your wrist, the length of that is going to be significantly shorter than from your hip to your ankle on your leg, okay? And that feature has developed over time because there is no real advantage to having longer arms anymore. The reason that our ancestors did have longer arms, so the reason Australopithecus did have those longer arms than what we do, similar length to their legs, is because chimpanzees or hominoids or even primates, one of their features in the fact that they aren't great at walking upright or having bipedal motion is they need to walk on all fours. And to do that, it is a great advantage to have much longer arms than legs, okay? So if you look closely at monkeys and gorillas and chimpanzees, that sort of thing, you'll see that their leg length is much shorter than their arms. And that's just so that they can prop themselves up on their front legs and still have their head elevated so that they can see, you know, predators, prey, that sort of thing, and take advantage of their binocular vision. All right, our next feature that we're going to look at is something known as a foramen magnum. Okay, so this is just a scientific word to describe the hole at the base of your skull where your spine attaches. So it's these dark circles in the images here. So we're looking at the underside of a skull. All right. Now, why is this feature so important? Well, it's important because this is where your spinal column attaches to your skull. And as we move through the evolutionary path going from Australopithecus to Homo, we actually see this hole in the base of the skull where the spine attaches moving closer and closer to the center of the skull. And the reason for that is we want our skull to be attached to our spine right in the center so that when we stand upright, straight upright, we are looking forward. Chimpanzees, or actually no, this one's a gorilla in this case, you can see that its foramen magnum is quite close to the back of the skull, and that's because its spinal column would attach like this, okay? And that's because they walk around on all four limbs. They need to have their head tilted in that way so that they can still look forward without straining their neck. Obviously, Australopithecus are one of the earlier hominins, so more closely, they're quite close, a close descendant of hominoids. Their foramen magnum is a little bit closer to the center of the skull, but not quite there yet because obviously they are quite new to walking upright and that trait is still being developed. So you would tend to see their spinal column being like this. And it just means that, yes, they can still walk upright, but it might kind of look like they've got a bit of a hunch going on or they're leaning forward a little bit. Whereas modern day humans or members of the genus Homo, their foramen magnum is closer to the center of the skull so that their spinal column is connecting directly underneath. So just by standing upright, you have that direct straight ahead vision or that binocular vision, and you don't need to bend your neck at all to see just by standing upright. All right, some other features that we see evolving. So we're looking at the jaw of our Australopithecus and modern day human, as well as the chimpanzee. So in the chimps, you can see that it's a very square shaped jaw. We get a bit more of a rounded, but still a little bit square jaw in the Australopithecus, whereas the humans have a very rounded jaw indeed. Okay, so this jaw here of a human is known as a parabolic shaped jaw. Okay, and that's just a feature that has evolved over time as the skull structure of Australopithecus and Homo have changed. Other features that have changed over time between Australopithecus and Homo are the brow ridge and the zygomatic arch. So you can see on the diagram here, we've got those brow ridges here. Lots of people think of brow ridges when they think of, Neanderthals or things like that. They have, I guess, the lumpy faces. And the zygomatic arch is referring to the bone region on the side of the skulls where you would have your jaw muscles attach. And it's believed that Australopithecus had bigger zygomatic arches because those jaw muscles were a little bit larger in them because they were herbivores. And being a herbivore, you need to chew quite a bit of plant matter, and you need to chew it for a really long time if you want to access the nutrients inside it. So lots of these features are interconnected in lots of different ways. And I guess this is all just scientists hypothesizing. None of it is obviously actually known because we've never seen one of these guys in real life.
And the last feature that we're going to look at today is looking at the brain size or the cranial capacity as it has evolved from Australopithecus to the genus Homo. So as you can see in the diagram here, or probably would have seen it in previous diagrams that we've looked at today, as we move along that evolutionary path from Australopithecus to the genus Homo, we are seeing an increase in brain size or an increase in cranial capacity. So in our fossil record, it's really, really obvious that as we move from Australopithecus through to the genus Homo, as each new species has evolved, we're seeing an increase in the skull size or the skull volume, which then scientists are associating an increase in skull volume with, well, if you can hold more volume in your skull, it's more likely that you can have a bigger brain size in that skull as well. So we are making that sort of connection there. Obviously, we don't have any physical proof of the size of the brain because unfortunately brain tissue does deteriorate over time once an organism has died. So we are just inferring this from their skull size. Some other features that we're also looking at, we have talked about the teeth and muscle jaws on a previous slide, so I'll skip over that one. The flattening and shortening of the face. So as we move through from Australopithecus to the genus Homo, Australopithecus skulls tend to have a really slanted shape, but the closer we move towards modern day humans, we can sort of see that that slant is lessening. And then when we get to modern day humans, we do have quite a flat face in comparison. And that is obviously linked to, one, we're bipedal now, we're walking upright. Our jaws have sort of reduced in size because we don't need as powerful muscles anymore. We're not eating our herbivorous diet anymore. We're more omnivorous, so we're eating much more high protein foods in meat as well, meaning that our skulls don't need the space for larger jaw muscles. Just some interesting points that I am going to point out before we move on is through the fossil record, obviously as scientists have discovered skeletons of Australopithecus, one thing that they have never discovered with an Australopithecus skeleton is tools. So scientists hypothesized that Australopithecus actually didn't have the ability to use tools, and that sort of ties in well with the idea that they obviously had a smaller brain size, smaller brain meaning they're probably not going to have the intelligence to develop those tools or to use those tools, whereas lots of the fossils in the genus Homo have been found next to tools that they have created themselves.